Good morning everyone. I am Genevieve and Pacho. I am going to report about race. Where does race come from? The word race was formed around 1490 to 1500. English borrowed race from the Italian razza, meaning kind, breed, and lineage. By the 1700s, as European colonialism and imperialism spread, nagsimula ng magbago yung meaning ng race. Dito na rin nag-start na i-divide yung mga tao according sa kanilang place of origin and skin color. And ito rin yung nag-serve as the foundation of slavery. Race, defined as a category of humankind that shares certain distinctive physical traits, refers to physical differences that groups and cultures consider socially significant, associated with biology and linked with physical characteristics such as skin color or hair texture. So sa race, para malaman nila kung saang grupo na bibilang ang isang individual ay nagbabase sila sa physical characteristics. For example, people might identify their race as Aboriginal, African American or Black, Asian, European American or White, Native American, Native Hawaiian or Pacific Islander. Last is Maori. Race data. They collect data because they want to ensure na yung policies na ginawa nila ay nakikater lahat ng needs ng mga racial groups. And they want to monitor compliance with anti-discrimination laws and regulations. Their data on race is based on self-identification. So dito mayroon ding problems with categorization. Dahil sa idea ng race, na-divide yung member ng society based sa kanilang physical attribution. And because of this, nakikita lang natin yung similarity nila when it comes to physical attribution but not genetically. And according dito na yung pag-observe sa tao base sa kanilang skin color ay hindi reliable para masabi natin kung saang race siya nabibilang. And that's all. Thank you.
Hello, I am Queenie Conde from Values Education 3E. I will discuss today about ethnicity. Ano nga ba ang ethnicity? Ethnicity refers to the identification of a group based on a perceived cultural distinctiveness that makes the group into a people. Distinctiveness, it means, pag sinabing distinctiveness is, madali mo siyang ma-identify or ma-distinguish. And this distinctiveness is believed to be expressed in language. So, madali mo silang ma-identify through sa gamit nilang language. Music, values, art, sa bawat ethnic group ay may kanya-kanya tayong music na ginagawa or kinakanta. May sarili din tayong values, may sarili din tayong arts, styles, literature. Sa family life natin, may kanya-kanya din tayong stage kung saan ka nabibilang. Religion, may iba tayong religion sa bawat ethnic religion. Konting trivia lang about sa religion. Sa religion, sa ethnic groups, ay mostly, isama natin yung religion tsaka ritual. So, religion and ritual is, mostly, sumasamba sila sa nature. Hindi katulad natin, na yung sinasamba natin is iisa lang. Si Jesus, yung God natin. In food, naming, may iba-iba din tayong pagkain, uri ng pagkain. Pero mostly, pag ethnic ka is more on, nakukuha na nila yung pagkain nila sa nature. Kaya nga, sinasamba nila kung ano man yung mga bagay na nagbibigay sa kanila ng tulong. Especially, yung ikinabubuhay nila. Naming, may iba pa tayong pangalan. public life, and material culture. Then, this cultural comprehensiveness is unique set of cultural characteristics perceived as expressing themselves in common unique ways across the socio-cultural life. So, ibig sabihin ng ethnic daw ay hindi ko konti lang, kundi maraming ethnic groups, especially dito sa Philippines, kasi ito yung bumubuo ng ating kultura. And it revolves around not just a population, a numerical entity, but a people, a comprehensive, unique cultural entity. Yun na nga, just like what I've said, na ang ethnicity dito sa atin is hindi lang kukonti. Marami yung nasasakop nito. The next, ethnic group in the Philippines. So, I will discuss about ano nga ba ang mga ethnic groups dito sa Pilipinas. Filipinos are Pacific Islanders, so it's not surprising to know that there are many ethnic group in the Philippines. So, yun na nga. Hindi iba sa atin na marami tayo mga ethnic groups kasi nga dito sa Pilipinas mostly is maraming island. Malaki yung hindi ganun kalaki yung Pilipinas pero marami tayong island. And Philippines that shape the culture and tradition of the country. Yun na nga sinasabi ko kanina na yung yung culture at tradition ay yung nag-shape sa ating bansa. Then, from the largest group Tagalog of monetary groups, there's a lot to learn and be amazed about different indigenous people of the Philippines. So, ang pinakamaraming ethnic group dito sa Pilipinas is Tagalog. Kaya nga, yung language natin, yung primary language natin is Tagalog. Kasi nga, mostly sa atin is Tagalog yung ginagamit na language. And yun din yung ating kinabibilangan na ethnic group. Next, this shows the mga ethnic group sa bawat lugar. First, ethnic groups in Luzon. Sa Luzon, meron tayong Tagalog, Ilocano, Kapampangan, Bicolano, Aita, Igorot, Ivatan, and Mangyan. Sa ethnic groups naman ng Visayas is Cebuano, Waray, Ilonggo, Ate, Solodnon. And next is, let's go and ethnic groups in Mindanao. We have Bajau, Yakan, Bilaan, Maranao, Tibuli, Tausog, in Bagobo. So, next, ipipresent ko sa inyo ang bawat ethnic group kung ano ba ang meron sa kanila or anong uri ng pamumuhay meron sila. Okay, let's go first with ethnic groups in Luzon. So, sa Luzon is first meron tayong Tagalog. So, tayo yun, yung Tagalog. Sa Tagalog, yung ginagamit nating language or yun yung yun yung ating ethnic group. Tawag sa ating ethnic group. As one of the major ethnic groups in the Philippines, the Tagalogs are believed to be the largest ethnic group in the Philippines. So yun na nga, tayo yung pinakamalaking ethnic group dito sa Pilipinas. Most of these locals are living in the National Capital Region, NCR, Region 4B, Calabarzon, and Region 4B, Mimaropa. So, Mimaropa is belong tayo doon, yung Palawan, kasi nga, either yung yung ating ginagamit sa Palawan is Kuyonon, yung Tagalog pa rin yung primary, ginagamit, or kadalasan ginagamit natin pag makikipag-communicate tayo sa ating kapwa Palawenyo. And have strong political influence in the country. Then, Tagalog is the mother tongue of the Filipino, and it was chosen as basis of the national language of Filipino, and it's taught in all schools. So, yun na nga, yung sinasabi ko, yung primary language natin, yun yung mother tongue na tinuturo sa bawat school. Yun yung pinapractice nating language kasi Yun yung ginagamit natin na mas madali sa ating magkakaintindihan kahit dito sa Palawan may kanya-kanya tayong dialect. Kagaya ko, anak ko Cagayanin. So, yung limbawa kaklase ko is Kuyonon. Kaya, para mas magkaintindihan kami, mas gagamitin ko yung Tagalog kaysa magkagayanin ako tas magkuyonin siya. O, di ba? Hindi kami magkakaintindihan pag sariling dialect namin yung ginagamit namin pag mag-uusap. Okay, next is Kapampangan. Kapampangan is a Luzon ethnic group that lives mostly in Pampanga and some part of Central Luzon, dubbed as culinary capital of the Philippines. So, natawag siyang culinary capital kasi mostly na masasarap na pagkain na niluluto is matatagpuan sa Kapampangan. And Kapampangan takes pride in their Samto's recipe and gives importance to strong ties of family. So, yun na nga, sinasabi ko, pag sinabing Samto's recipe is yung mga pagkaing masasarap. At yun yung kinakilala nilang mas nagiging strong yung family nila through sa pagluluto ng mga masasarap na pagkain. Then next, let's go. Ilocano. The Ilocano people are believed to be the third large ethno-linguistic group in the Philippines. So, pangatlo sila sa pinakamalaking ethnic groups dito sa Pilipinas. They mostly reside within the Ilocos region, some parts of Cagayan Valley region. Mostly matatagpuan natin sila sa Cagayan Valley. Doon yung maraming mga Ilocano. Then, they are known for being prudent and hardworking. So, nakilala natin sila bilang isang mga taong masyadong sa trabaho nila. Hardworking. Masyado silang mabusisi sa bawat mga ginagawa nila. Then, this is group ethnic in the Philippines continuously practice their old tradition to preserve their culture. So, until now, pinapractice pa rin nila yung mga old traditions nila or especially yung mga old way ng pamumuhay nila para mas makontinue nila kung ano yung mayroon silang pamumuhay dati hanggang sa mga new generations. And next, Bicolano. Let's go with in Bicol. So, I love Bicol Express. Yun yung masarap sa kanilang foods. Kahit ako, I love Bicol Express. So, Bicolano people are those who are living in Bicol region. This Filipino ethnicity group is known for being religious and calm. So, mostly sa kanila is religious person and calm. So, ibig sabihin, hindi sila masyadong pagalit, hindi sila masyadong ganun ka as in nagsisigaw or something na magmumukhang monster or pagalit sila, hindi sila ganun. They also known for their distinct way of cooking where coconut milk is mass on Bicolano dishes. Yun na nga, yung pinaka number one example is yung Bicol Express. Pag Bicol Express kasi marami yan siyang isang karne siya, laman, then may konting taba, pero marami siyang sili, and di mawawala talaga yung yung coconut milk. May gata yun, may gata. Karne na may gata. Pero maanghang. So, diba? Ang sarap. Ang sarap ulamin yun habang mainit pa yung kanin. Pero mas masarap ang pulutan. Hindi, char. Okay. Aita. Also called Ita. The Aita people in ethnicity is known to be one of the oldest ethnic in the Philippines. Yung Aita daw, yung isa sa pinaka old ethnic dito sa Pilipinas. So, ibig sabihin, yung Aita is ito yung isa sa pinagmula nating ethnic group dito sa Pilipinas. Aitas live in the mountains province of Zambales. So, pag mga old ethnic group is mostly nakatira talaga sa mga mountains. So, yung pinaka main source ng pagkain talaga nila is yung paghahunting paghahunting ng pagkain para makakain sila. Ito na nga, their way of living is a simple, very traditional, especially when it comes to hunting for food. Yun, para makakain sila, maghahunt sila ng mga ligaw na mga hayop, para yun yung magiging hapunan nila ng kanilang mga pamilya. And kumakain din sila ng mga fruits kung ano yung nakikita nila sa kanilang paligid. And ngayon naman, dadako tayo sa mga igrot. Is mostly matatagpuan yung mga igrot sa Cordillera. The igrot are found in the Cordillera Administrative Region or CER. This ethnic group in Cordillera made some of the Philippine destination popular such as Banawi rice terraces. So, isa sa lugar na gusto kong puntahan is yun nga, yung Cordillera. Kasi nga, gusto ko yung mga, gusto kong makita yung in real, yung Banawi rice terraces, kung gaano ba ito kaganda pagmasdan pag nakita mo to ng personal. Which is one of the UNESCO World Heritage Sites. They have strong beliefs and ethnic tradition in the Philippines and highly respect their anito. So, diba, alam na rin natin kung anong ibig sabihin ng anito. Kasi nga, minsan nakikita natin ito sa mga event natin sa school, yung mga kung paano nga ba mag-anito. And strong belief in ethnic traditions, yun na nga. Kaya until now, yung karamihan sa kanila is mostly nagsusuot pa rin ng kanilang ethnic na mga kasuotan. Lalo na pag maraming dumadayo sa kanila na bisita from the other province. Next is Ivatan. Ito talagang pinaka magandang lugar. Tahimik siya. Ito yung pinakamagandang place na pwede mong puntahan kung gusto mo talaga mag-relax. One of the most popular ethno-linguistic groups in the Philippines are the Ibatans because of their notable traits such as hardworking and honesty. So, sa Batanes, doon natin matatagpuan yung honesty store. Kasi nga, mostly sa mga tao doon is mga honest. So, dapat kahit tayong mga turista, pag bumibisita tayo doon, is magiging honest din tayo. Ipakita natin sa kanila na hindi tayo ganun kasama or hindi tayo masama. So, pakisamahan natin sila. And most tourists who explore the Philippines consider the Bataan as the kindest locals. So, yun nga, one of the kindest local yung mga Ivatan daw. Kasi nga, kung ano meron sila is ino-offer nila sa mga turista na bumibisita sa kanila doon. This ethnic in the Philippines is found in Batanes and their way of living is very simple. So, mostly yung mga tao nakatira doon is simple living pa din. Hindi pa sila masyado ganun ka-develop yung lugar na to. So, karamihan sa kanila is namumuhay pa rin bilang isang simpleng mamamayan. Malayo dito sa city. Then, Mangyan. Ito din, pinipreserve talaga nila yung kanilang traditions. Mangyan, all of the different ethnic groups in the Philippines, Mangyans are once found in Mindoro province, which are divided into 8 groups. So, yung Mangyan daw, hindi lang siya kokonti. Mas marami talaga yung ethnic group ng Mangyan. Hindi lang talaga Mangyan yung tawag sa kanila. Hindi lang iisa. Kasi may iba't ibang klase silang, may 8 groups. To this day, Mangyan is still practicing their old traditions and culture in the hopes and preserving them. So, until now, dinedemo or ginagawa pa rin nila yung kanilang sarili, yung mga kanilang old traditions. Yun na nga, nakikita natin sa picture. Di ko alam kung anong ginagawa nila, pero old traditions yung isa sa mga old traditions yung pinaperform nila. And one of their tradition is writing ambahan, a form of poem, and they carve it in bamboo. So, yun na nga, yung ambahan is, yung ibig sabihin is a form of poem. Gumagawa sila ng poem sa bamboo. Doon sila nagsusulat para mas siguro yun yung pinaka-convenience way nila para mag-save ng poem, para hindi ito basta-basta mawawala or mababasa pa ng kanilang mga anak or mga kaapu-apuhan. Next, let's go in ethnic groups in Visayas. Okay. First, we have Cebuano. Cebuanos are one of the major ethnic groups in the Philippines. Most of these people live in Cebu or some parts of Mindanao. So, they known or being creative, soft-spoken in So, di ba nga, mostly sa ginagawang memes is yung mga Cebuano, mga taong nagsasalita ng mga Cebuano, kasi nga sobrang nakakatuwa yung the way na magsasalita sila, kasi sobrang smooth lang, sobrang soft lang. Hindi sila masyadong nagsasalita na hindi malakas yung boses, kagaya nga kanina dun, parang sa Ilocano ata yun. Basta yun. And next is Waray. Waray people are in ethnic Philippines that are found in Samar and Leyte. Yun na, yung Waray daw is mostly makikita sa Samar and Leyte. Doon sila nakatira. They are known of being brave and strong, yet very loving, especially when it comes to their family. Yung Waray daw ay matatapang na mga tao, pero mapagmahal naman sila sa kanilang family. So, actually dati hindi ko talaga alam tong Waray, pero narinig ko lang dati sa singer. Basta yung babae na maliit, yung kakanta ng Waray-Waray. Yun lang yung alam ko dito. And next, Ilonggo. Yon, Ilonggo. Isa sa mga, soft-spoken din ng mga tao. The most notable ethnic groups in the Philippines with description would have to be Ilonggo people, because when you hear Ilonggo, the best word that describe them is tender. So, tender. Nakakatuwa silang pakinggan kasi they are sweet and soft-spoken. Pag galit sila, yung hindi mo mahalata na galit sila kasi nga malambing pa rin yung boses nila. Ilonggos live in Iloilo, Panay, Guimaras, and Negros. So, I have a sister live in Iloilo, and sa ngayon, yung language na ginagamit niya na is Ilonggo na. Hindi na siya masyado nakakapagsalita ng Cagayanan kasi nga doon siya nakatira. Doon sila nakatira, pero yung asawa niya hindi talaga doon, kundi Tagalete talaga yung asawa niya. So, may lahi. Yung asawa niya na Waray. Share ko lang. Kunting trivia lang for Ilonggo. And next is Ati. Ati is also one of the ethnic tribes in the Philippines that very notable. These shouldn't be confused with the Aitas. While they look similar, so similar sila, same silang maitim, tas makulot yung buhok. Maitim din, pero hindi ko maitim din naman ako, pero hindi kulot yung buhok ko. So, Tagalog ako, bilong ako sa Tagalog. While they look similar, they speak different language. Kahit magkapareho sila physically, but magkaiba naman sila ng ginagamit na language. So, sabi ko nga, bawat ethnic group is may kanya-kanya tayong ginagamit na language. Yun yung pinaka-primary use natin para makipag-communicate sa ating kapwa ethnic groups of people. But like the Aitas, hunting is a huge part of their way of living. So, yung pinaka-huge way ng pamumuhay nila is yung paghahunting din kasi nga sila ay nakatira din sa mga mountains. And they are most found in Aklan, Capiz, Antique, and Iloilo. Yun, mga ating makikita natin sa Aklan, Capiz, Antique, and Iloilo. The next is Suludnon. The Suludnon people ethnicity is popular for their cultural dance, Binanog, where the mikmik and movements of the eagle while using the agong. Hindi ako masyadong familiar dito sa ethnic group na to. But feeling ko is yung ethnic group na to is also pinipreserve nila yung mga kanilang old traditions until now. Pinapangunahan ng kanilang mga oldest member or mga elder nila. Sila yung nangunguna para ipakita sa mga new generations kung ano mga traditions yung mga ginagawa nila dati. And next, let's go in ethnic groups in Visayas. Okay. Bajau. The Bajau tribe in Philippines can be found in Zamboanga and Sulu, where they live above water. That's why are called sea nomads or sea gypsies. Mostly sa mga Bajau ay nanirahan sila sa may tubig. So sa atin dito, tinatawag natin sila nakatira sa mga squatter area. Kasi nga wala talaga silang dito, wala silang mga lupa na pwedeng pagtayuan ng mga bahay. Kaya mas pinili nilang doon tumira, tsaka primary din source ng nila, living nila is pangingisda. Kaya doon sila mas pinili na tumira. The people in this ethno-linguistic group in Mindanao are also good swimmer. So their major source income comes from the sea. Yun na nga sinasabi ko kanina. A good swimmer. Kaya dun nila mas piniling tumira kasi nga dun yung nila. Mas madali sila makakahanap buhay doon. Next is Yakan. There are many different races in the Philippines and each of them has their own distinct features. Yakan and ethnic groups in the Philippines living in Basilan. Yung Yakan daw is kilala sa pinakamalaking contribution sa pagwi-wave ng mga tela, or itong waving is a huge part of their culture. Kasi nga yun yung pinaka talaga nila, source din ng pamumuhay nila, yung pagwi-wave ng mga tela. So karamihan nakikita natin yung mga damit nila doon is makukulay kasi nga nagwi-wave sila ng mga tela. And next is Bilaan. The Bilaan group lives in South Cotabato in Davao del Sur. They're famous for making clothes made of abaka. So same with Yakan. Gumagawa din sila ng mga damit na makukulay with ornaments, bass, and heads. So, nakikita natin yung mga mga suot-suot nila yan. Busisi talaga yung pagkagawa niyan. Kaya nga maganda siya tingnan at makukulay siya tingnan pag sinuot na nila. Ayan na yung model nila of more on matatanda kasi nga yun talaga nagpapakita ng old traditions nila. Next is Maranao. So sa atin yung Maranao, hindi na sa atin kasi kahit dito sa atin is maraming Muslim na nakatira. Maranao is derived from the place Lawa at Lanao del Sur and Lanao del Norte. So kahit wala sila dun sa kanilang lugar is pinapanatili pa rin nila yung kanilang ayos or kanilang traditions kahit dito sa atin, which means Lake of Lanao del Sur and Lanao del Norte. This Filipino ethnicity made of traditional clothing, malong, popular across the country. So, pag Maranao ka, dapat nakatago yung buhok mo. Tawag dyan hijab. Tinatakpan ng mga kababaihan ng kanilang mga buhok. bilang sa kanila kasi is sacred yung buhok nila. Bawal ipakita sa kahit na sino. Only yung asawa nila. Kahit sa bahayan sila naghihijab yan sila. Tibuli. Tibuli is one of the ethno-linguistic group in the Mindanao. The popularly are known for their beautiful and colorful traditional clothing called tinalak. So, nag-ano din sila ng damit, nagwi-wave din sila ng damit na sila mismong gumawa and makukulay. May mga beads din sila na sa kanilang buhok at yung kinukwentas din nila. Kahit yung mga bata, pinapractice na rin nila kung ano yung mga ginagawa nila dati. Bali, pinapasa na lang nila kung ano yung traditions nila sa kanilang mga new generations. These Filipino ethnic groups lives in South Cotabato and Sultan Kudarat. So, doon na South Cotabato and Sultan Kudarat. Doon sila nakatira. Next is Tausog. Isa din to sa pinaka-old na mga ethnic group. The Tausog people are one of the 5 ethnic groups in the Philippines that are notable. Known as the people of the current Tausog, live above the sea and Sulu with the floating house. Same sila ng Badyaw. Nakatira din to sila sa dagat, sa tabi ng dagat, or yung bahay na naka-float lang sa dagat. Also, it means yung source of living nila is also nanggagaling sa dagat. Yung fishing most of the Tausog is fishermen. Next is Bagobo. It's believed that Bagobos are the first encounter Spanish colonized. However, the Spanish failed to colonize them. The Bagobos mostly live in Mindanao. So, I mean Davao. Mali pala. Davao. Mostly, nakatira sila sa Davao. Tinatry sila dati na i-colonize ng Spanish pero hindi sila nagpapatinag sa mga Spanish. So, ibig sabihin, matatapang yung mga Bagobo. And that's all. And next, let's find out what is the difference between race and ethnicity. So, these words are often used interchangeably, but technically they are defined as separate things. Race and ethnicity have been and continue to be used as ways to describe human diversity. Nagsabi nito is Nina Jablonski, an anthropologist and paleobiologist, the Pennsylvania State University, who is known for the research into evaluation of human skin color. So, ang sabi niya is race is understood by most people as mixture of physical. So, pag race daw is na-identify mo sila sa kanilang physically. Physically. Halimbawa, yung pag maitim ka, ibig sabihin ma-identify mo as a Black American. So, parang parang discrimination din yung tawag dun. Ethnicity, ethnicity recognize difference between people mostly on the basis of language and shared culture. So, dito sa ethnicity is, ma-identify mo siya through sa ginagamit nilang language tsaka yung culture na ginagawa nila. So, I think sa race, mas marami siyang discrimination kaysa sa ethnicity. Kasi pag ethnicity is, dito, sa modern generation, mostly, yung mga ethnic, is pinapangalagaan. Pero pag race, basta para sa akin is parang negative yung dating. After this, may ipapakita kaming video na nag-i-explain kung yung differences ng race at ethnicity. And that's all. This is my references. Dito nakalagay yung kung sino yung nagsulat at san ko ito nakuha. And again, I am Queenie E. Conde from Values Education 3E. Thank you for listening and God bless.
There are many inequalities in a population based on race and ethnicity. Just to get some terminology out of the way, let's figure out the difference between race and ethnicity. Race is a socially defined category that is based on physical differences between groups of people. Racial formation theory looks at the social, economic, and political forces that result in socially constructed racial identity. Sometimes these differences are real, but sometimes they are only perceived or are defined by history. In the 1800s, if a person in the United States had a black ancestor, they could be considered black even if they appeared white. Honestly though, since all humans are 99.9% identical genetically, there really isn't enough wiggle room in human DNA for there to be a genetic foundation for race. And yet, it is incredibly important on a social level. Every culture places a different importance on specific physical characteristics. For example, in the US, race is identified by broad categories of skin color, but hair color is considered unimportant. In South America, there are more specific categories of skin color. The Latin American race in the US may be broken down into 5 or even 6 different categories of races in South America. Ethnicity is also socially defined, but instead of using physical characteristics, these groups are defined by a shared language, religion, nationality, history, or some other cultural factor. Ethnic groups are less statistically defined than racial groups, and the definitions can change over time. Sometimes the ethnic minority can even be absorbed into the majority after a generation or two. A minority consists of a group that makes up less than half the total population and is treated differently because of some characteristic. In the 1900s, native-born Americans did not consider Irish, Italian, or Jewish immigrants to be white, which actually resulted in a discrimination against them and limited where they could live. Discrimination is the unjust treatment of a category of people simply because they belong to that category. It often results from prejudice, which is when someone has some preconceived opinion that isn't based on reason or experience. Okay, let's get back to those immigrants. While the immigrants weren't considered white, the children of those immigrants were considered white because they were culturally American, and so their skin color could be used to determine their ethnic identity. As we begin to look at socially defined groups of people, please keep in mind that what I'm saying doesn't apply to everyone in that group. Just like the English language, there are always exceptions, and we need to be sure not to stereotype everyone in a group. We can look at statistical values for a group, but these are only guidelines, trends to keep in mind as we look at the population as a whole. There are a lot of statistical differences between both different races and different ethnicities. Racial differences especially can cause some drastic events, such as genocide or population transfer, where a group is forcibly moved from their territory, or internal colonialism, where a minority group is segregated and exploited, or assimilation, where the minority group is absorbed into the majority. Pluralism, on the other hand, actually encourages racial and ethnic variation in a society. Statistically, families, education, income, birth rates, and life expectancies all vary between racial and ethnic groups. There's a widespread disparity in healthcare between racial and ethnic groups as well. Many Americans simply cannot afford basic healthcare, which then affects the lifespan of these people. Statistically, minorities tend to have shorter lifespan because of limited access to healthcare, lower income jobs that can have greater dangers in the workplace, a higher prevalence of toxins in the environment, as well as personal behaviors like drinking or a poor diet. Throughout history, dominant groups have racialized minority groups. This means the dominant group ascribes some racial identity to members of a minority group that they did not identify for themselves. You can see this in the labor force of the United States. There is a myth in the United States that everyone has equal opportunities in life, including access to education. In reality, different races tend to be stereotyped for certain jobs. Minorities are expected to have lower paying jobs, while majorities are expected to have higher paying jobs. Asian Americans and whites overall have more access to education than African Americans or Latin Americans. And what it usually comes down to is economic and cultural factors. The cost of education can be too high for minorities who statistically tend to work lower wage jobs. And perhaps culturally for some people, starting a family is more important than continuing an education. This perpetuates the trend of difficulties for minorities. But it isn't just the cultural differences. Our society is structured so that racial and economic subordination develops and is sustained. In order to get a higher paying job, you need a good education. So when education is not a priority, or isn't available, or when it is simply withheld because of discrimination, the jobs available are unskilled or semi-skilled, low-paying jobs. An interesting discrimination among different races and ethnicities is present in the criminal justice system. While laws may not seem racist, the punishment for similar offenses vary drastically. For example, the punishment for crack cocaine, which is less expensive and used by low-income users, is much tougher than for powdered cocaine, which is much more expensive. This separates the rich from the poor in the justice system, handing out tougher sentences to low-income criminals who statistically are minorities. There are also higher unemployment and dropout rates for minorities, providing fewer options other than crime. If you look at the percentage of people in jail who are minorities, it is much higher than the percentage of minorities who live in the United States. These numbers don't line up. Percentage-wise, more minorities are being incarcerated than their white counterparts.